Hello, Eric here. I'm going to show you how to make a fence-supported compost tumbler. With this in mind, the goals for this project are the following. I want the compost tumbler to be sturdy and stand against the wheel of time. I want to make the compost tumbler as cheaply as possible with as little wood as possible. I also want the tumbler to be big for a lot of composting, as functional as possible, with no internal mechanisms that need any maintenance whatsoever. Spoiler, I succeeded in all of these things. Not only will I teach you how to make this design, I will show each component used to craft it. Later in the video, I will show you why you should use a compost tumbler over other composting methods, and I will also show you how to use it. So let's get started. I have this part of my side yard that gets over 12 hours of sun a day, but it's too narrow to really do anything with. This project is perfect for creating a useful space out of a previously unused area. Just try to avoid building outside in 100 degrees, like I did. On the right, I'll show you everything I used on this project and where I got the materials. Feel free to stop the video or screenshot if you want to document the materials yourself. The first thing you need to do is locate a 55-gallon drum. I recommend Facebook Marketplace or other similar sites. Next, we're going to Harbor Freight. You will need 4 swivel caster wheels with a brake. The wheels should be made out of rubber or hardened plastic. Do not buy clear wheels as they're not UV protected for outdoor use. Next, you'll need some sturdy hinges. I recommend T-hinges as they support the middle of your door and will keep it from bending. We'll be using gate latches to lock our door in place. This will guarantee the life of our door without it warping or collapsing to the weight of the compost. All of the remaining materials will be from Home Depot. You'll need to buy a 2-part epoxy, which is completely food safe once cured, but make sure that it bonds to metal. You'll need 12 1/4 by 3/4 hex bolts and 12 1/4 hex nuts to tighten them. I strongly recommend fitting your fasteners into the hardware that you buy to make sure that the fit is snug. All of our fasteners will either be zinc coated or galvanized steel. This prevents them from rusting outdoors. Next, you'll need 6 3/4 inch number 10 round head machine screws or hex bolts. These packages come with their corresponding nuts. Like the other fasteners, you're going to want to fit them to make sure. You'll also need 1 by 1/4 inch exterior coated screws. We'll be pairing number 10 zinc flat washers with them. These will be our fasteners for our caster wheels. For the main structure, you'll need bigger exterior screws, ranging anywhere between 2 1/2 to 3 1/4. It's really your choice. I would recommend just using 3-inch screws. Finally, we'll need our singular 1-inch by 5/16 hex bolt and its 5/16 hex nut. These will allow us to strongly lock our gate latch with no chance of our compost falling out. If you don't have a table saw, you're going to want to buy 3 pressure-treated 2x4s. If you do have a table saw, I strongly recommend buying pressure-treated 2x6s instead. They're used less often, leading them to be significantly more dry, and all the warping that this shitty wood will do has already happened. When picking out wood, avoid any boards with warping, twisting, giant knots, or cracking. I'll be ripping 2x6s into 2x3s, which will save on average $1 per board, and the wood will be higher quality. Now we need to figure out our dimensions. Since I'm building this for me, a 6'6" adult man, I don't want it to be too low. For obvious reasons, I don't want it to be too high either. To figure out an ideal height, simply take a measuring tape from the bottom and take the reading at your torso. I'm comfortable with 46 inches of height. This accounts for the height that I would need to dump a 5-gallon bucket into these tumblers. Next, we'll need to take a measurement of the drum's height while on its side. We'll subtract the height from the total structure's height. We need to account for the caster wheel height, which in this case is 4 inches total. Subtract that from the height as well. This will help us calculate our structure's leg length. For this design, we lose 2 inches from the top caster wheel bracing, so add 2 inches to your legs. It's now time to cut our wood. Since I own a table saw, I'll be ripping my 2x6s lengthwise. Here's a tip to help rip your long boards. Simply use a piece of scrap wood and notch it at a 45-degree angle. Cut that scrap wood with its depth facing upwards. This will give you a long-handled shim to place between the wood you're ripping and prevents it from squeezing your saw blade. If you're new to this, place your 2x6 to the side of your saw blade. You're looking to raise your saw blade just a few millimeters above the board. Now, I'm simply going to rip my boards in half. This isn't a fine woodworking project, so don't worry too much about perfection, or getting perfectly halved boards. Before you start cutting, make sure you're applying pressure downwards and towards the fence. Otherwise, you'll increase the chance of kickback, and the board will go flying at your face. Now that you're cutting your board, take your time. Feel if the machine is struggling or not. If your board stops cutting, don't force it. Simply use the shim I taught you, and hammer it in between the freshest cut. This will separate the tension in the board and keep it from bending towards each other. The shim will stay in place without any additional effort on your part. Always use a saw stick to push the board through at the end. It's not worth risking your fingers. Another pro tip is to avoid hitting your camera with the wood that you're cutting. Fantastic. Now that you've ripped your boards, or if you just bought 2x4s, you'll need to make your perpendicular cuts. You can use a miter saw, a skill saw, or a handsaw for this. If you use a handsaw, and believe me, I've been there, this is the point that you'll call it quits for the day. Handsawing is exhausting. Don't push yourself too hard. The measured cuts for my schematic are 2 36-inch boards, 4 21-inch boards, 4 17-inch boards, and 4 6-inch boards. Half of these 6-inch cuts will be diagonal supports. Simply cut them in opposite directions at a 45-degree angle. An easy way to remember how to cut these angle supports is that the diagonal cuts will always face towards the middle of the board. Now for these angle supports, you can leave them as is, but they'll have an overhang that can catch water when it rains. It's not a deal breaker, but I'll be adding a dog ear cut to one side. If you don't want to make this cut, simply make 2 of your 6-inch cuts into 8-inch cuts instead. With that length, you won't have any overhang. With that done, it's time to build our fence-supported frame. Here's all the tools and wood I'll be using for this part of the build. You don't need all the tools I used to build this compost tumbler, but because I have them, I will be using them. I'll be using 2 drills, one for pre-drilling holes and one for fastening screws. I will also be using 1 rubber wood hammer to protect my hands. We'll be using 1 box of 1 1/4 inch screws, 1 box of 3-inch screws, and a pack of zinc-coated flat washers. I'll also be using a tape measure, 4 caster reels, 3 wood clamps of different sizes, and our previously mentioned wood measurements, including 2 32-inch side braces, which are optional. First, we need to build the connecting legs using 2 21-inch boards and 2 17-inch boards. Make sure you orient the cut sides of the wood in the same direction. If you bought 2x4s, you don't have to worry about this step. We'll place 1 support at the top of the brace, and a support a few inches from the bottom of the brace. Build this on as flat of an area as possible to prevent misguided screw placement. Try and make the middle supports flush with the top and an equal distance from the bottom. Once your pieces are in place, pre-drill a straight hole and then your drill bit towards the piece you want to connect, while holding down the trigger. From there, you can screw in your 3-inch screw, starting out straight, then turning it diagonally, fasten all the way. Now simply repeat this step for the other 3 corners we want to fasten. We need 2 identical leg braces for this build, so you're going to have to build 1 more. Now we'll connect our 36-inch fence back support. Turn your legs 90 degrees so that their tops are facing in front of you. I recommend pre-drilling 2 holes on each side of your board, about ½ an inch from the ends. Space the board roughly 5 to 7 inches above the feet's ground level. Make it as square as you can while eyeballing it. Then simply screw in 2 3-inch screws on each side. Now that the legs are connected, flip your project right side up so your legs are pointing at the sky. At the front of the build, we're going to attach our 6-inch boards. Pre-drill 2 holes at the end that you'll be attaching them to. Once the tops are attached, bring your angled support in. Pre-drill at the correct angle for your screw length. You want the support to be attached in at least 2 places, forming the right angle you see here. Now that the fronts are on, we can attach our caster wheels. You need 4 1 1/4 inch screws and 4 flat zinc washers per wheel. Line them up at the very edge of your front braces. Once aligned, place your washers on top of the fastener holes and screw in the wheels, starting diagonally. This helps ensure the wheels stay in place. Do this for both sides. The next step is to fasten our other caster wheel brace. This will be the remaining 36-inch piece. For these 55-gallon drums, spacing the wheels 17 inches apart, depth-wise, sank the drum perfectly into the angle that we need to rotate it at. So here, I'm measuring out exactly 17 inches from the gap between each end of the boards. As I'm attaching this brace, it's giving me the chance to square the frames by straightening the sides as I screw the board in. To make sure our wheels are placed accurately, take a measuring tape and get the measurement from your front wheels to the end of the board. With that measurement, you can accurately position your other wheels, screw them in as well. Now it's time to test if the drum rolls. This test is not for stability. Once filled, the drums will be heavier and they won't shake from side to side when tumbled. However, if you want to add a brace to the side of the structure or the bottom of the drum, this is how you do it. Simply get your 32-inch board and position it in the middle of your drum. Clamp the bottom of the board and fasten the top. Once you fasten the bottom, you're done. Well, that was a lot of work so far, but we're almost done. Now it's time to craft an actual compost tumbler out of this 55-gallon drum. The tools I'll be using for this part of the build are as follows. You'll need 2 drill bits that fit each size of bolt that you want to attach, or just 1 drill bit that fits the largest size. This is where we'll need both of our T-hinges and our gate latch. You'll need either a piece of paper or a measuring square to draw your door. You can use anything you want to mark on the drum, but I recommend using a dry erase marker, as you can just rub off the marked areas when you're done. You'll obviously need a drill and something to cut plastic with, like a box cutter, a hacksaw, or in my case, a free old jigsaw. Additional materials that might help is a low grit sandpaper and an acrylic hole cutter bit. You don't need this bit if you have a large enough drill bit. You can get full sets super cheap at Harbor Freight. The fasteners we'll need for this part are 12 zinc hex bolts and 12 zinc hex nuts, 6 zinc machine screws and 6 of their corresponding nuts, 1 zinc hex bolt at 1 inch 15/16 and 1 zinc hex nut at 15/16. For the door, I'll be marking it with a carpenter square. The door will be 11 by 10 inches. You can make your door wider or taller by up to 2 inches, but I wouldn't go any larger than that. Next, I'm going to mark the top holes for the T-hinges. Notice how I'm not marking the door yet. That's because the holes on the door would shift once I cut the door out. I'll pre-drill the T-hinge holes to make it faster to attach once the door is out. Now it's time to start the door. With a large drill bit or this acrylic hole cutter, drill into all 4 corners of your door frame. This will increase the airflow and allow us to get our blade in. When using a jigsaw on a curved plastic surface like this, you can really screw up your workpiece. In order to remain in control and cut accurately, you must put all the force towards your cutting direction and on the piece that you're not cutting. If your weight shifts to the door itself, it'll cause the door to rattle uncontrollably and your blade will stop cutting altogether. keep your tool's pressure constant on the drum itself, not the door. After the door is out, it's a good idea to give it a once-over with some sandpaper. If you don't have sandpaper, you can use a damp fibered towel with some force. That should be enough to get rid of the shavings. To attach the T-hinges, lock them into place with 6 bolts, 3 per hinge. Get them all through the hinge before setting your nuts. This will help keep them true to the angle that you originally set the hinges to. Once the hinge base bolts are fastened, we can start adding the long part of the hinge to the door. Mark your middle hole with the marker and drill the hole through. Once you connect and fasten that bolt with a nut, you can simply drill the remaining holes without marking them. If you're having trouble tightening some bolts, like I am here, you can use a ratchet set or a pair of pliers to twist them into a locked position. It's time to attach the gate latch. This is just as easy as the T-hinges. Simply mark 2 of the diagonal holes on the gate lock. Drill through them and fasten the lock onto the drum. Drill the remaining 2 holes and fasten those as well. When attaching the latch, you'll need to mark just the bottom hole. Make sure to get quite close to the gate lock. We'll be using the remainder of the latch as a handle. Drill the last hole for our remaining machine screw, and we're done with the hardware of this project. Fasten your last large 5/16 hex bolt and nut into the gate latch to lock it in. And then give it a spin for that dopamine proof that what you actually made works. Alrighty, we only have 2 more steps until the drum is officially a composter. First of those 2 is drilling aeration holes. This is arguably the most important step. Make your drill holes in whatever way is aesthetically pleasing to you, just make sure you make a lot. I'll be drilling my holes 2 inches apart and between 4 to 7 inches between the rows. The size of the holes actually matter. When I looked up other DIY compost tumblers, most of the holes were pathetically small. To make compost tumblers effective, you need a large amount of air tunneling through your tumbler. I wouldn't drill holes any less than the thickness of a Sharpie marker. For this standard acrylic hole cutter, I'm drilling about halfway down the bit. The size of my main body drum holes are probably the size of a standard marker. Now, this is kind of a messy process. You might want to have a broom or a dustpan or like a shop vac available. In fact, I'm sitting here editing this video with blue swirly plastic pieces littering the cracks of my concrete still. Now it's time for our crosswind holes. You want to make these holes as big as you can. I'll be driving my acrylic hole cutter all the way through the length of the bit. Bunch these holes up more than the drum body holes that you made. Also, try to avoid any of the sides of the drum. We're just trying to make an aerated current through the middle of the compost tumbler. This will help keep the compost inside from becoming anaerobic when we're not turning the tumbler. anaerobic conditions in your compost not only causes a disgusting odor, which for a multitude of reasons is a bad situation, but anaerobic conditions will also significantly slow down the rate at which your tumbler composts by slowing down decomposition. Make sure you drill identical holes on each side of your composter. These aeration holes won't work if only one side is drilled. The very last step to this tumbler setup is cutting out room for the gate latch to turn effortlessly. Simply mark a wide area around your gate latch to account for any movement that might occur during tumbling. After that, we just need to cut the piece of wood out. You can use a skill saw, a hand saw, chisels, or whatever else might work here. I'll be using a table saw. Once I move the saw blade to the proper height, I'll be removing this portion of wood by very slowly pushing the marked area over the saw blade and then back to me. Once I remove the entire portion, I'll slide it left to right over the saw blade and remove any dangly bits that might have been left behind. Now you just have to secure your caster wheel brace back into its 17-inch position and rotate your tumbler to make sure you have a clearance for the gate latch. We're more or less done with the setup at this point. You can now position the wooden structure squarely against your fence or another surface that you wish to keep it. The compost tumbler will hold itself up just fine in its full weight while against the structure. However, if you do get worried, you can always fasten the back brace by screwing it into the fence, or add some diagonal supports to the structure itself. It's a good idea to wash out both the outside and the inside of your drums. This should help remove any excess pieces of plastic from your drilling. Now let it dry completely. If it's late in the day, then I guess you're finishing this tomorrow, like me. You don't need to epoxy your fasteners, but if you don't, you're going to have to retighten your hex nuts regularly. I'd rather just spend $6 and never have to deal with them again. Making sure that the inside of your composter is dry, simply unpack your epoxy and flick off the cap. In order for this epoxy to activate, you need to get both fluids on the same point of contact. The easiest method for me is to draw it on like I'm coloring with pencils. Apply the epoxy to the bottom of every single hex nut. I did not personally apply the epoxy to any of the bolt or screw heads. The dry time says about an hour, but it will probably take closer to 10. That was a lot of work, and it took me a while to get it done. But that's because I made 4. So, just like I promised, I'll end this video teaching you why you should use a compost tumbler, how to use a compost tumbler, and how much it costed me to make these. Let's start with the price. The total cost to build all 4 of these 55-gallon compost tumblers came out to about $164. Comparing this to the retail compost tumblers of similar gallon sizes and sturdiness, I've saved a little over $200 per tumbler. In fact, I basically could have built 6 55-gallon tumblers for the retail price of one decently built compost tumbler. I'm also not counting those dinky little 33-gallon compost tumblers on the market. They have way too many longevity problems and debris gets stuck in their rotators too often to be enjoyable to use. Second, let's talk about why you should use a compost tumbler over other composting methods. Well, for one, you only have to lightly tumble the drum every 3 days to a week, so the effort needed isn't very much. Not only that, but keeping your compost in the air, being properly aerated while being pounded by the heat of the sun, speeds up the rate at which your compost decomposes exponentially. Depending on what you put in this bin, you can turn over compost in little over a week or 2. And that's plant-ready compost. That's super fast production. I promise me cutting my neighbor's overgrown jasmine is actually relevant to this video. Alright, let's talk about how to use a compost tumbler. It's fairly similar to how you would normally compost. The problem is, most people don't know how to normally compost. There's this beautiful rule called the 50-50 rule. In its simplest terms, you'll fill your compost tumbler with 50% brown matter and 50% green matter. Brown material is classified as plant matter that is completely dried out over weeks to months. Green material ranges anywhere between fresh cut to slightly dried out food scraps. Green materials are moist. This is where people make mistakes. For example, dried grass clippings have a super high nitrogen still. even if they're dry enough for you to snap them in half with one hand, dried grass is still considered green material. I will not be going over every single detail of composting in this video, as it's too long already, but I do expect to make a video just about composting in the future. If you break the 50-50 rule, your compost will either turn into a disgusting slurry, or it will become a chunky mess that might even become hydrophobic. Your best brown material will be wood chips, woody cuttings, completely dried leaves, or dried forest products. Your green material can be pretty much any fresh pruned plants, grass, fruit and vegetable food scraps, or even egg-based products and bread. To compost expediently, you'll need green material, brown material, lots of aeration, enough moisture, and heat. The more aeration and heat you have while keeping a moist environment, the faster decomposition will occur. If you've added the appropriate amount of all of these things, the next step is giving your amalgamation of earthly goods a nitrogen boost. The most common way to do this is either to add animal manure or a decent amount of used coffee beans. If I were to fill these 55-gallon drums all the way up, I'd probably add about a half or a full gallon of used coffee beans to the mixture. So how am I filling up my composter? Well, since I don't have any wood chips yet, which is the main brown material that I will be using for these composters, I'll be using this $2 bag of forest product topsoil. If you're in a similar situation as me, just make sure your topsoil is heavily infused with wood or bark materials. Next, I'll be filling it with a week's worth of food scraps. This 5-gallon bucket is filled with eggs, head and tail cuts from carrots and other root vegetables, onions, and whatever else my roommates threw in here. I'll also be throwing in some of my neighbor's fresh pruned jasmine. Now I'm going to add nearly a full gallon of used coffee grounds. This will jumpstart the nitrogen cycle and our beneficial bacteria will love it. Finally, I'll add a bit of water to help moisten the environment. Don't water too much though, you don't want any of this draining out of your holes. When trying to calculate your 50-50 rule, there's a method to it. Your brown material is going to stay roughly the same size. Your green material, however, will shrink anywhere between 1/8 to 1/12 of its original size. So when you make your 50-50 calculations, you'll be factoring in the shrunken end result of the green material, not the fresh cut size. I would like to share a tip regarding beneficial organisms that help break down compost. We're talking earthworms, isopods, beneficial bacteria, beneficial fungi, etc. You don't need to purchase any of these things. I actually already showed you how to obtain this healthy little ecosystem of organisms. What you'll want to do is find somewhere in your yard with a decent amount of dirt or soil. Place all your prunings and clippings of normal yard work on top of that patch of dirt. Let it dry out for about 2 to 3 days. Once it starts shrinking, give it a healthy dose of water. Your goal here is to hydrate the bottom layer of clippings and the soil that's touching them. The plants on top will almost create this greenhouse effect, and that will bring all your free organisms over to enjoy a healthy meal. After about a week, you can simply cut these clippings to the appropriate size and throw them into your compost tumbler. My last tip is to avoid putting any rhododendron or azalea clippings in your compost. The roots, and sometimes branches and leaves, are highly toxic to most living organisms, including humans. If your compost or soils are struggling after adding these, that's because they're killing off most of your beneficial organisms. Well, that's it. If you enjoyed this video, I hope that you'll subscribe. The video took 26 hours to edit, and I'd appreciate the motivation. If you want to see what my channel is about, you can watch this super cringe channel trailer that I made. With that, I bid you farewell, and I hope you indulge your creative side. Go build something.